Old Seattle, 5515 CE. Carbon dioxide at 1200 ppm. The small hill, only a few dozen feet above sea level, was where Anthropogenic Age Queen Anne Hill had stood, part of Old Seattle. Seattle used to be composed of 8 large hills, the highest 800 feet above sea level. Now they were considerably lower in elevation. Thanks to the new sea level, Seattle was now 7 islands and a peninsula. To the south, where the nearby shoreline had once been, legend said that an ancient pillar known as the Space Needle had extended 300 feet out of the still water, with another 300 feet under the sea. No one called it Seattle anymore. This place did not deserve a name. Sea level had risen 240 feet before it stopped. Gradually, the human race, considerably reduced in numbers, had gotten used to this new level. And then, gradually, the poison started breathing out of the sea, a fetid bad breath left over from the 4 billion to 2 billion year old Archean era of the early Earth. The poison had been newly resurrected by a warming of the planet to the degree that the thermohaline circulation currents stopped. All major ocean currents went still. It took only about 2,000 years for the oceans to lose oxygen at their bottom, because once the currents were shut down, so too were the mechanisms that kept the deep ocean oxygenated. After that, it took just 500 more years for this oxygen-free water mass, filled with hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria, to reach the photic zone, the depths above which plants can photosynthesize in the sea. Once that happened, a new wave of bacterial bloom occurred. Green and purple sulfur bacteria. Once the surface of the global ocean was bereft of oxygen, but replete with hydrogen sulfide and phosphate and nitrate nutrients, and all the oxygen-dependent creatures, small to large, had died in the transition. The surface seas had filled with green and the much more visible purple sulfur microbes. The color of the ocean changed. To humans, purple became the color associated with death. No longer did widows wear black. Any strong gust of wind from the nearby sea brought the rotten egg stench to this one-time city. The seaway itself, part of old Puget Sound, was made up of smooth, wave-free water, clear and beautiful under the hot tropical sun, fringed by palms and other tropical plants. The entire vast waterway lapped right onto the Olympic Mountains to the west, which were now islands. The colors of the sea were spectacular in the bright sun, perhaps made all the more vivid because of the high ultraviolet content of the sunlight. The shallows, with their microbiolite reefs, showed the green, red, and brown colors characteristic of such reefs, which were now virtually global in extent. Farther out, the ocean was a deep purple, painted that vivid hue by the untold billions of purple sulfur bacteria that lived in the sun-dappled upper parts of the sea, a place that, like the bottom, held no oxygen. To a diver from the 20th century, or even from the first few decades of the 21st, the reefs would look strange indeed. Coral reefs throughout time have been characterized by their high diversity of life, and some of the most spectacularly diverse groups were always the small reef fish. Millions of them would dance in the sun, busily going about their business amid the tropical coral reefs. But corals were now mostly gone, and they were not part of these reefs. No coral could live in the 90-degree, largely anoxic body of water that Puget Sound had become. The bottoms of that sea were sterile of all but microbes. Only a thin slick of oxygenated water could be found. Nevertheless, once in a while, a tropical mackerel or wahoo would stray from the open sea, where there were still regions of oxygenated surface water. The Pacific was faring better than the Atlantic in terms of maintaining its oxygenated deep bottom waters. The rise of anoxia was neither worldwide nor evenly distributed. But the many fjords newly formed along the Pacific coast had quickly gone eutrophic and oxygen-free. Western Oregon was a large inland sea, with highlands still rising out of the water to its west. But that giant new seaway was home only to microbes, many busily engaged in producing hydrogen sulfide, and in this way was similar to all of the traditionally quieter waters and smaller seas. Places like the new Gulf of Mexico, which now extended well into Missouri and parts of the Dust Bowl Desert formerly known as Oklahoma, the entire Mediterranean Sea, and Hudson Bay. Puget Sound and the Straits of Georgia were among the first to go largely anoxic. Soon after the completion of the 240-foot rise in sea level, salmon had disappeared early in the 21st century, and while fish farming had kept the stocks alive for a while, eventually the tropical conditions and flooding of the rivers finished off both wild and farm-raised fish, thanks to the steadily rising chemocline, the border between oxygenated surface water and anoxic bottom water. Oil, followed by coal, had gradually run out. By necessity, humanity reverted to a low-tech, pastoral lifestyle. Infant mortality increased. Old age became rare. Because there was no coal, there could be no smelting of metals, and without petroleum, there was no more plastic. Human population worldwide had subsided to less than 1 billion people, living largely on yams, taro, tapioca, potatoes, and corn. Cows, pigs, and sheep were now all extinct. The rising hydrogen sulfide content in the atmosphere had killed them off. It was often considered a happy miracle that humans could withstand higher concentrations of hydrogen sulfide than could livestock. In fact, the who's who of survivors among mammals had little rhyme or reason. All the reptiles and amphibians thrived. Anything with cold blood thrived. But the warm bloods were hit hard. Hardest hit of all were the birds. Their exquisite double-pump lung system, with its intricate set of air sacs placed cleverly into the hollows of their very bones, served them well at higher altitudes and in their strenuous exercise of flying. But their very efficiency at extracting oxygen molecules also brought in far more hydrogen sulfide than what any other kind of animal internalized. While the sky was still filled with flyers, all were insects of one kind or another. All birds were now extinct. For the surviving humans, food was always a problem. Long gone were the mega-farms of previous millennia, because there was no fuel for tractors, and then no tractors. There was no electricity, because metallurgy had just about ceased. The only metals were those scavenged from the wastes left behind by the pre-flood people. But each year, oxidation and rust returned the metals to more oxidized minerals. Metal did not last long, even in the relatively mild monsoon seasons of the Seattle regions, the 6 months where it rained only 200 inches, and the temperature rarely exceeded 110 degrees. It had been a powerful thing, that global warming and the truly apocalyptic sea level rise that it unleashed. It was the ultimate kill mechanism between a warmed planet and its dying animals and plants.